The diner clock ticked like it was counting down something bigger than seconds. A man in a worn navy cap sat alone at the corner booth, calm, still, watching. To anyone else, he looked like another quiet drifter. Coffee-stained menu, weathered hands, faint stubble on his jaw. But beneath that silence was a kind of authority that doesn't need to speak. The waitress didn't notice him at first. Not really. She was too busy dodging insult from a manager, too tired to care about another lonely customer. He smiled faintly when she poured his coffee. "Rough day?" he asked. She sighed. "They are all rough." He nodded. Sometimes the hardest days show who we really are. No one knew that the man with a $1 tip was worth billions. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and quiet disappointment. Grease shimmered on the counter like a tired memory. A flickering neon sign outside buzzed its last bit of light into the cold morning. It was a kind of place where hope came cheap, but so did kindness. Clarissa moved between tables like someone walking through rain with no umbrella, fast, focused, bracing for the next hit. Her apron was faded, her smile worn thin from overuse. Each table told a story of impatience, half-eaten pancakes, cold eggs, and people too busy to look her in the eye. Rick, the manager, leaned against the counter, checking his reflection in the chrome of the coffee pot. "Clarissa," he barked, "Table 4's been waiting 10 minutes. You want to lose tips again." She flinched but nodded. "Yes, sir." "Don't, sir me. Just move faster." His smirk followed her like a shadow. In the far booth, the man in the navy cap stirred his coffee slowly, watching. His name was George, though no one here knew it. On paper, he owned half the city's skyline. In person, he looked like a man barely hanging on. He'd been coming here for 3 days, never at the same time. Always sitting where he could see the kitchen door swing. Always tipping exactly $1. People noticed and judged. Lewis, the line cook, whispered to another server. "Guy's probably broke. Looks like he sleeps in his truck." "Yeah," the other laughed. "Or just cheap $1 tip. Please." George pretended not to hear. The laughter behind the counter was thin and mean, but it filled the air. Even cruelty became routine when people were tired enough. Clarissa came over with the pot. "Refill." "Please," he said softly. Her hands trembled a little as she poured. The coffee overflowed slightly. She gasped. "Damn it, Clarissa!" Rick snapped from the counter. "Can you do anything right?" The customers looked up, then down again. No one said a word. George glanced at the spilled coffee, then at her shaking hands. "It's all right," he said quietly. "Happens to everyone." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Thanks." He smiled faintly. "You've got a good heart. Don't let people talk you out of it." She blinked, unsure how to respond. He sipped his coffee, burnt, bitter, unkind, but didn't complain. In the kitchen, the radio crackled an old song about second chances. Lewis hummed along, his hands stained with grease and exhaustion. Rick's voice cut through the melody like a knife. "You think this is a karaoke bar, Lewis? Focus." "Yes, boss," Lewis muttered. Rick smirked, adjusting his tie that had long since lost its dignity. He loved power, even the tiny kind. Especially the tiny kind. George kept observing. The tension, the hierarchy, the unspoken fear that hung heavier than the smell of oil. Every insult Rick threw landed on someone who couldn't afford to fight back. When the rush ended, Clarissa sat briefly at the back counter, her shoulders slumped. A young busboy, maybe 16, skinny, quiet, handed her a napkin. "You dropped this earlier." She smiled weakly. "Thanks, kid." He nodded. "You're the only one nice to me here." Her eyes softened. "Then you keep being kind, okay? Even if nobody else is." George heard that. His eyes lowered, remembering a voice from years ago, his mother's maybe, or his wife's, saying something similar before life got loud and cruel. He opened his wallet and saw the folded letter inside, a reminder of why he was here. The diner wasn't random. It was owned by one of his subsidiaries, a place where the numbers looked fine, but the people didn't. He came to see why. And now he was watching the answer unfold right in front of him. Rick strutted over, smacking the bill on the table. Coffee's $2.75. Tips optional. But I guess you already know that, huh? George smiled faintly, sliding 3 crumpled dollars forward. Keep the change. Rick scoffed. Big spender. George looked up, steady, calm, unflinching. You'd be surprised what people are willing to spend when it matters. Rick rolled his eyes and walked off. Clarissa watched, quietly mortified by her boss. George just finished his coffee and began writing something on a napkin. Slow, deliberate strokes of a pen that had seen 100 boardrooms and 1,000 secrets. When he left, he placed $1 on the counter, and the napkin beneath it. No one noticed. Not yet, but what was written there would change everything. The morning crowd faded, leaving only echoes, clinking cups, tired chatter, the hum of the old refrigerator filling in for conversation. Clarissa stood at the counter, staring at the napkin the man had left. The writing was neat, deliberate, not rushed like the usual scribbles customers left behind. 3 words, simple, unassuming, but they made her throat tighten. Don't give up. She folded it carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket, as if it might disappear if she didn't hold on to it. Who left that? Lewis asked, wiping the grill. That guy, she said, nodding toward the empty booth. The one with the cap. Rick snorted from behind the register. You mean Mr. $1 tip? What? He left you a love note. Just a message, she murmured. Rick laughed, the sound flat and cruel. Sweetheart, if you want motivation, try not messing up coffee orders. That'll change your life faster. Lewis looked down, jaw tight. He'd learned the hard way not to argue. George, though they still didn't know his name, had left the diner, but his presence lingered like the smell of coffee grounds or song stuck in your head. Clarissa went back to clearing tables. She found herself glancing toward the door every few minutes, half expecting him to return. But he didn't. Not that day. The sky was still bruised with dawn when George parked his old pickup behind the diner. The kind of truck no billionaire would be caught dead driving, which was exactly why he drove it. Inside, the routine misery had already begun. Rick was barking orders before the clock hit 7. Lewis, the fryer's late again. Clarissa, smile more. You look like you're at a funeral. Clarissa forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Yes, sir. George walked in quietly. Same booth, same order. Rick saw him and groaned. Oh, great. Coffee guy's back. Morning, George said evenly. Rick slapped the counter with a menu. Let me guess, coffee and a $1 tip? Big spender strikes again. George just nodded. Coffee's fine. Clarissa hurried over with the pot, heart racing for reasons she didn't understand. Morning, she said, voice soft but warmer than yesterday. He smiled faintly. You kept the napkin. Her eyes widened. You saw that? I noticed things, he said. She hesitated, then whispered, Thank you. I needed it. He nodded. People who still care usually do. Their exchange was brief, but it made the air feel different, like a window cracked open in a stale room. Rick noticed, and didn't like it. Hours passed. The diner filled with its usual mix of construction workers, retirees, and tired mothers dragging hope behind them like grocery bags. George stayed quiet, observing. He saw the way Rick spoke to people. Sharp, cutting, always performing for anyone who'd listen. He saw how Clarissa apologized for things that weren't her fault, and how Lewis moved more slowly when Rick turned his back, like exhaustion was a silent rebellion. Then came the moment that broke the calm. A woman at table 3 complained that her eggs were cold. Rick stormed into the kitchen, slamming the plate onto the counter. Lewis, what is this garbage? You trying to put us out of business? Lewis stepped back, stammering. Sir, they were just made. Rick cut him off, voice rising. Don't talk back. You want me to tell corporate you're slacking again. Clarissa froze mid-step. Rick, please. He didn't do anything wrong. Rick turned on her, eyes like blades. Oh, of course. The great Clarissa to the rescue. Maybe if you focus on your job instead of playing hero, we wouldn't have customers walking out. The diner went silent. George watched, expression unreadable. He didn't move, not yet. Rick shoved the plate toward Lewis. Remake it, and next time, try not to breathe on it. Lewis swallowed hard and obeyed. Clarissa turned away, blinking fast. George set his cup down. You handle people differently depending on who's watching, don't you? Rick looked over, irritated. Excuse me. You're loud when you think no one important's here, George said calmly. You might want to fix that habit. Rick sneered. And who are you, huh? The kindness police. George gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. Something like that. Rick rolled his eyes. Look, old man, if you're not happy with the service, there's a gas station down the road. I'm sure they'd love your $1 tips. George just nodded. I'll remember that. The tone wasn't threatening, but it wasn't nothing either. It carried quite a weight, the kind that made people nervous without knowing why. Rick walked off muttering. Clarissa exhaled slowly. Sorry, she whispered. It is not usually. George interrupted softly. Yes, he is. You just stopped noticing. She looked at him then, really looked. There was something in his eyes she couldn't name. Not pity, not superiority, just knowing. He folded another napkin, writing something down again before sliding it toward her. Read it later, he said. She nodded. That night, when the lights dimmed and the last customer left, Clarissa finally looked. It said, kindness is courage in small doses. You have it. Don't waste it. Tears stung her eyes. She tucked the napkin beside the first one in her apron. Rick came up behind her, voice dripping sarcasm. You writing love letters now? She toned, startled. No, it's nothing. He snatched the napkin from her hand before she could stop him. Kindness is courage. What kind of nonsense? He froze mid-sentence, eyes narrowing. That from the coffee guy again. Please give it back, she said quietly. Rick smirked. Oh, I get it. You're into him. Because nothing says romance like cheap coffee and cheap tips. Rick, stop. He waved the napkin like a flag. You know what? Maybe I should hang this in the back. Inspiration for all the losers who think nice words pay rent. Lewis stepped out from the kitchen, fists clenched. That's enough, man. Rick spun on him. You want to be next? Keep talking. George's voice came from the doorway, calm, level, dangerous in its steadiness. Don't. Rick froze. What are you doing back here? George walked forward slowly, placing his cap on the counter. I forgot something. You can't just walk in after closing. I can, George said, and I just did. Clarissa's breath caught. There was something in his posture now. The quiet labor was gone. What stood there looked like someone used to being obeyed. Rick scoffed, masking unease. You got some nerve. George cut him off. You should apologize. Rick blinked. What? Apologize to her, George said, for what you just said, for what you've been saying. You don't talk to people like that. Rick laughed, but it sounded forced. You're out of line. Buddy, this is my diner. George looked around, at the peeling paint, the burnt bulbs, the staff who looked like they'd forgotten what respect felt like. No, he said quietly. You just manage it. Rick frowned. What's that supposed to mean? George didn't answer. Instead, he placed a single folded paper on the counter. It wasn't a napkin this time. It was an envelope. Open it in the morning, he said, and maybe think about who you become. Then he turned and walked out, the bell above the door giving a single, solemn chime. Outside, the night air was a bit cold. George leaned against his truck, staring up at the diner sign flickering between letters. Eat here, or don't. He sighed. The words almost felt like a challenge. Inside, Clarissa held the envelope, unsure if she should open it. Lewis nodded toward her. You think is serious. She shook her head. I don't know what to think. Rick snatched it from her hand. I'll handle this. Don't. She started, but he was already tearing it open. Inside was a single typed letter on company stationery, faint watermark glinting under the light. Western Holdings Group. Rick's jaw went slack. He read the first line aloud. Effective immediately, this establishment will undergo internal review for conduct and compliance. He blinked, confused. What the hell does that mean? Lewis frowned. Weston Holdings. That's one of the biggest corporations in the country. Clarice's eyes widened. Wait, Weston? As in George Weston. Rick froze, the napkin in his hand, the name on the letter, the man in the cap. Oh, no, he whispered. Clarissa covered her mouth, realization dawning slow and sharp. The quiet man with the coffee, the $1 tips, the messages. He wasn't some drifter. He owned the place, and he'd seen everything. The next morning, black SUVs lined the parking lot. Men in suits stepped out, badges clipped to their belts, clipboards in hand. The diner staff watched from inside, hearts pounding. Rick stumbled forward, face pale. What's going on? One of the officials flipped a folder open. We're conducting a workplace inspection. Orders from Mr. Weston himself. Mr. Weston. Rick stammered. His coming here. The official's gaze was cool. His already been here. Silence. Clarissa turned toward the booth where George always Saturday. The coffee cup is still there. The napkin is still folded. And suddenly, the $1 tip didn't look small anymore. It looked like a warning, a test, and everyone had failed it, except her. Morning broke over the diner like light over a battlefield, cold, unforgiving, and far too bright for the truth it exposed. The parking lot was a lineup of black SUVs in quiet authority. Men and women in suits walked in single file, clipboards in hand, eyes sharp, movements calm, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Inside, silence ruled. The air smelled of coffee and fear. Rick stood frozen near the register, the fake confidence drained from his face. His cheap tie hung crooked. Sweat gathered at his temples. Clarissa and Lewis stood behind the counter, eyes darting between the inspectors and the booth. His booth, still empty, still echoing. The napkin with the words, "Don't give up," sat folded neatly on the counter, untouched, sacred. Then, the door opened. The bell chimed once, and the man in the navy cap walked in. Every head turned. The suit straightened. The staff stiffened. Rick's voice came out as a nervous laugh. You're Mr. Weston." George took off his cap. The fluorescent light caught the silver in his hair, the quiet power in his eyes. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. "George Weston," he said evenly, "owner of Weston Holdings Group." Which means, "Yes, Rick, technically, this is my diner." Rick stammered. "Sir, Mr. Weston, I had no idea. I didn't mean." George held up a hand. Silence dropped heavier than any insult could. "I didn't come here for apologies," he said softly. "I came here for honesty." He turned to the inspectors. "Begin." They moved through the diner like surgeons, quiet precision, pens scratching, cameras clicking. One lifted the lid of the fryer and frowned. Another measured food temperatures. A third opened a cabinet and found boxes stamped expired. Rick's throat worked hard. I can explain." George's gaze didn't move. "You always can." Clarissa felt a pulse in her throat. She wanted to say something, anything, but she couldn't. Her voice was trapped between fear and disbelief. Lewis stepped closer to her, whispering, "Is really him?" She nodded, barely breathing, and he saw everything. Across the room, Rick tried to recover. "Mr. Weston, I swear, I was just trying to keep things running. We're short-staffed. You know how it is." George's expression didn't change. Short-staffed doesn't mean short on decency. Rick swallowed. It was just discipline. These people, they... George cut in quietly, "Are my people." That stopped Rick cold. The inspectors gathered near the booth, placing folders on the table. One of them whispered, "Multiple violations. Labor code, food safety, and employee treatment reports. It's bad, so..." George nodded. "Document everything." Rick paled. "So, please, give me a chance." "Chance." George repeated. "You had hundreds of them. Every time someone flinched when you raised your voice. Every time someone stayed late and you didn't say thank you. Every time you thought no one was watching." He stepped closer, his voice calm but heavy with truth. I was watching. Rick looked like a man unraveling. I didn't know who you were. That's the point, George said. You shouldn't have to. The diner felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen. Lewis spoke up, voice shaking. Mr. Weston, sir, please, don't fire all of us. We didn't. We just needed the job. George turned to him, his face softening. I know, son. I saw you. You worked hard, even when it didn't matter to them. You tried to protect each other. That's what matters. Lewis blinked, stunned by the kindness. Clarissa took a tentative step forward. So, those napkins, were they a test? George looked at her for a long moment. No, they were reminders. For you and for me. She frowned gently. For you? He smiled faintly. Once upon a time, I forgot what kindness looked like. I built towers so high I couldn't see the ground anymore. I came here to remember. Clarissa's eyes glistened. And did you? He nodded. I did. Rick slammed his hand on the counter, voice breaking under pressure. You think you can just walk in here and ruin me? George turned to him slowly. You ruined yourself. Rick's breath hitched. You have no right. I have every right, George said. But what I won't do is shout. Because shouting is what you do when you've already lost the argument. He looked around the diner. You ran this place like a kingdom of fear. You thought cruelty was management. That's not leadership. That's a weakness. Rick trembled with anger. You think you're better than me. George's voice was quiet, almost sorrowful. No, I just decided not to stay this version of you. The inspectors handed George a folder. He opened it, flipping through pages of violations. The list was long, too long. Effective immediately, George said. This diner will close for review. Every employee will be compensated during the transition. Training, repairs, rehiring, everything. Rick's face fell. You can't do that. This is my livelihood. George looked at him for a long, heavy beat. And what was theirs? Rick? You think they wanted to spend their lives afraid of a paycheck? Rick had no answer. George placed a folder on the counter, then turned to Clarissa. You will help me rebuild this place. The right way. She blinked. Me? I'm just a waitress. No, he said. You're the reason it's still worth saving. Her hand went to the pocket of her apron, to the napkin she'd saved. The words seemed to echo now, louder than ever. Don't give up. Then came the final straw. As the inspectors began packing up, one noticed a hidden ledger under the register, handwritten, dog-eared, filled with numbers that didn't match the reports. Rick lunged forward. That's private. George's tone sharpened. No, Rick, that's evidence. The inspector flipped through the pages. Looks like underreported wages and falsified tips. Clarissa gasped. Lewis muttered, He's been stealing from us. Rick's face drained of color. That's not. I didn't. George's voice was ice. You made them feel small, and then you took what little they had left. He stepped forward, eyes hard now. You'll answer for that. Rick stumbled backward, desperate. Please, Mr. Weston, I can fix this. It's already fixed, George said softly. You're done. He nodded to one of the officials. Escort him out. Rick's protests echoed as they led him to the door. The bell gave its usual cheerful jingle, but today it sounded like judgment. Silence again, only the hiss of the coffee pot, the hum of the fridge, and the faint creak of the booth where George sat down, for the last time as a stranger. Clarissa wiped her eyes, stepping forward. Sir, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, George said gently. Just promise me you'll keep being the person who speaks up. The world doesn't need more managers. It needs more people like you. Lewis cleared his throat. You really mean that? George smiled. Completely. Courage isn't loud. Son, it's steady. You had it, even when it scared you. Lewis nodded, emotion breaking through. Thank you, sir. George reached for his coffee, the same burnt, bitter brew he'd ordered every morning. He took one sip, grimaced, then chuckled. Still awful. Clarissa laughed through her tears. We were never known for good coffee. He smiled. You will be. Soon. He stood and looked around. The cracked tiles, the crooked signs, the ghost of a broken routine. This place deserves better, he said. You all do. Then he turned to the inspectors. Prepare Phase 2. One of them nodded. Renovation and rebranding under Western Foundation, community-focused initiative. Exactly, George said. A diner that feeds people, not egos. He glanced at Clarissa. You'll oversee the transition with the team I'm sending tomorrow. I'll check in when it's ready. She hesitated. Sir, why me? George looked at her with quiet conviction. Because you cared when no one was watching. That's leadership. That's rare. Her lip trembled. I won't let you down. He smiled. You already didn't. As he turned to leave, the young busboy, the quiet one from before, ran up. Mister. George stopped, kneeling slightly to meet his eyes. Yes. The boy held out a folded napkin. You left this the other day. You wrote something on it. George opened it. His own words stared back. Kindness is courage in small doses. He smiled. Keep it, he said softly. One day you'll need it. The boy nodded, clutching it tight like a secret. George put his cap back on, the disguise that somehow felt lighter now. He looked around one last time, at the faces, the tears, the quiet hope rising from the rubble of shame. Then he walked out. The bell above the door chimed once, not judgment this time, but renewal. And as the sun caught the windows of the diner, it didn't look like failure anymore. It looked like a beginning. The sun hung low over the diner's parking lot, throwing long shadows across cracked asphalt and faded paint. The black SUVs were gone now, replaced by silence, the kind that hums after truth is spoken. Inside, Clarissa and Louis cleaned in slow, reverent motions. The smell of disinfectant mixed with coffee and something new, hope. The world hadn't yet learned what happened here. But it would, because at exactly 7:14 p.m., in a penthouse office 50 miles away, a phone buzzed on a glass table. Message received. Activate B. Within minutes, the gears began turning. Press releases drafted. Statements queued. Private memos dispatched to every division of Western Holdings Group. The subject line was simple. The Diner Project. Inside the message, a video still, captured from a security camera, showed the diner's interior. The frame caught three faces. Clarissa, exhausted but kind. Louis, quiet and loyal. And Rick, mid-shout, courting cruelty. The text below it read, Integrity isn't a slogan. It's a standard. This week, we found out who still remembers that. Effective immediately, Western Holdings will implement new employee welfare orders across all subsidiaries, beginning with restaurants, factories, and retail spaces. No workers invisible. No managers unaccountable. No kindness ignored. At the diner, Clarissa's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, confused. Louis, she whispered, it's everywhere. He came over, wiping his hands. On the screen, social media feeds lit up with a headline. Undercover Billionaire exposes toxic workplace. Leaves $1 tip that changed lives. She gasped. The thumbnail was a photo. Him, sitting in the booth. The cap, the calm eyes. The same one she'd looked into without knowing. Oh my God, she breathed. Louis read aloud. He's been going undercover in his own businesses to see how workers are treated. Clarissa's voice cracked. That's why he came here. Louis nodded slowly. That's why he didn't say anything. He was watching. Meanwhile, in a sleek conference room downtown, the Western Board of Directors sat in tense silence. At the head of the table was a tall man in a dark suit, stern face, red tie, polished arrogance. One of the board members, the kind who forgot what real work looked like. George has lost his mind, he muttered. Publicity stunts and diner projects. His going soft. Another member spoke up, hesitant. Sir, the public loves it. The story's gone viral. Our brand reputation just skyrocketed overnight. The first man scowled. We're not in the business of feelings. A voice from the doorway cut through the tension. Then you're not in business anymore. They turned. George Weston stepped in, not in his disguise this time. No cap, no faded polo. Just quiet authority wrapped in a simple gray suit. The room went still. George, the board member said, forcing a smile. We were just talking about me, George interrupted calmly. Good. Saves time. He set a folder on the table. Inside are reports from 30 of our businesses. Mistreatment, unpaid overtime, falsified safety logs, and a culture built on fear. The diner was just one branch of a rotten tree. The older man sneered. And you think public shame fixes that? George's voice was steady. No, but sunlight does. He walked to the window overlooking the skyline, the one he'd built, the one he'd owned. But now, it looked different. All my life, he said quietly, I was told to build higher, bigger, stronger, but I forgot to build deeper, where people actually live. He toned. The diner project isn't a stunt. It's the start. I'll rebuild our brand from the ground up, literally. The older man laughed under his breath. You'd throw billions at sentiment. George smiled faintly. No, I'm investing in decency. The returns are better. He walked to the door. If you can't stand behind that, hand in your resignation by morning. And with that, he left. Back at the diner, the night crew gathered to lock up. Reporters had already begun circling, cameras flashing outside. Clarissa stood at the counter, clutching another napkin, one she'd found taped under the booth after he left. It read, "You saw what others ignored. That's a difference between surviving and leading." She smiled through tears. Lewis watched from the grill. He really changed everything, didn't he? She nodded. No, he reminded us we could. That night, George sat alone in his pickup, parked on a quiet hill overlooking the city lights. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Clarissa, we're reopening soon. I'll make sure the coffee's finally worth drinking. Teacup with handle. He chuckled softly, typing back. Make it strong. People need it. He slipped his phone away and leaned back, the reflection of the city glinting in his eyes. Then, almost without realizing, he whispered to the dark. Maybe kindness was never the weakness they said it was. The wind carried the words away. And for the first time in years, George Weston, the man who once owned everything but forgot what mattered, felt like he had something priceless again. Peace. The morning after the reveal felt different. The diner parking lot, once a graveyard of rusted cars and broken dreams, was alive with noise, camera crews, flashing lights, and people holding cups of coffee like tokens of victory. Inside, the smell of bleach and bacon blended with adrenaline. Clarissa stood behind the counter, adjusting her uniform with trembling hands. The red apron she'd worn for years suddenly looked proud. Lewis flipped pancakes on the griddle, pretending not to notice the news crews filming through the windows. But his eyes darted between every word on the TV mounted above the counter. News alert. Undercover Billionaire exposes abuse at local diner. Corporate reforms begin nationwide. He turned the volume up. Sources confirmed that George Weston, CEO of Weston Holdings, went undercover as a kitchen worker for 6 weeks. His investigation revealed systemic mistreatment of staff, falsified work records, and unsafe conditions at several company-owned establishments. The story has sparked nationwide debate about workplace culture, empathy, and corporate accountability. Clarissa turned the TV off. The silence that followed felt heavy. Lewis broke it with a soft laugh. Guess we're famous now. She looked around at the diner. The same cracked tiles, the same hum of the fridge, but it felt like standing in a different world. Famous, she murmured, for surviving something that should have been kind. At that same moment, across town, Rick sat alone in a cold conference room. His tie was loose, his smugness gone. A folder sat open before him, marked Internal Review. Opposite him, a corporate investigator flipped through documents slowly. Rick tried to sound calm. Look, I was doing what I was told. Quotas, efficiency reports, upper management. You know how it is. The investigator didn't look up. We have footage of you berating staff, falsifying payrolls, and threatening termination without HR approval. Rick swallowed. You think I'm the only one? The investigator finally looked at him, eyes sharp, voice steady. No, but you were the one on camera when the CEO walked in. Rick's voice dropped to a bitter whisper. He set me up. Maybe, the investigator said. Or maybe he gave you enough rope. He closed the folder. You're officially terminated. You'll be contacted about restitution hearings and potential legal proceedings. Rick slumped back, staring at the table. The swagger was gone. What remained was smaller, a man who mistook control for power, now stripped of both. That afternoon, George Weston walked through the glass lobby of Weston Holdings, the same lobby that once echoed with silence and status. Today, it buzzed with press and energy. Cameras flashed as he took the stage for the emergency company address. He looked over the crowd, executives, employees, journalists, even janitors, all standing shoulder to shoulder. He adjusted the microphone and spoke plainly. 6 weeks ago, I went undercover in one of our diners. I saw what it means to be unseen. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I watched good people work double shifts with no rest. I watched managers reward cruelty over honesty. And I realized that somewhere along the way, I forgot who this company was built for. He paused. So here's what happens next. He clicked the remote, and behind him, a massive screen lit up with a list titled, The Rebuild Initiative. Full compensation for every worker affected by unpaid labor. New leadership training centered on empathy and ethics. Employee councils in every location. Direct reporting access for staff to reach senior management. Profit sharing for long-term hourly employees. A collective murmur filled the room. Cameras snapped. George continued, I'm not asking for applause. I'm asking for accountability. From me, from you, from everyone who wears this name. He took a deep breath. And one more thing. The diner that started all this, it's staying open, but it won't be part of a chain anymore. Gasps spread through the hall. He smiled faintly. It'll be employee-owned, managed by the people who made it matter. Back at the diner, Clarissa stood frozen, her eyes on the small TV mounted over the register. George's words echoed through the speakers. Employee-owned. Lewis dropped the spatula. Did he just say? Clarissa nodded, barely breathing. He did. The others, cooks, dishwashers, waitresses, began to cheer. Some cried. Clarissa wiped a tear from her cheek and whispered, He gave it back to us. That evening, as the cameras faded and the world moved on to the next headline, George visited one last time. He parked his old pickup in the same spot, the one he'd used every night during those undercover weeks. Clarissa saw him through the window and froze. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she smiled and opened the door. Back for another shift, she teased softly. He chuckled. Just needed to see the place again. It looks brighter. She glanced around. We were painted the booze. Lewis said red was too much trauma. George smiled, eyes warm. He's not wrong. They stood in silence for a while, just listening to the hum of the lights and the clatter of dishes. Finally, Clarissa spoke. You didn't have to do all this. You could have walked away. George's voice softened. I did walk away. 4 years. That's what made me come back. She looked at him for a long time, then said, You changed more than a company, you know. He smiled faintly. Maybe it changed me first. In another corner of the city, the sharp-faced female manager sat in a small office, a lawyer beside her. She was being reviewed for reinstatement, not as a manager, but as a compliance assistant. It wasn't mercy. It was a consequence. She listened as HR read the verdict. Given your cooperation and the reforms that followed, you're offered re-employment under supervision. If you accept, your role will involve ensuring others aren't treated the way you treated them. For the first time, she didn't argue. She simply nodded. A week later, the diner reopened under new sign. Clarissa's Place, employee-owned. The letters were hand-painted, uneven, and perfect. Customers lined up outside. Cameras caught the moment Lewis flipped the open sign for the first time. Clarissa stood beside him, in a new apron but the same worn shoes. The moment she stepped into the sunlight, applause broke out. Inside, the first order of coffee went out to a familiar customer, George. He took a sip, nodded approvingly. "You were right. It's finally worth drinking." She laughed, the sound light and honest. "Guess we had to own it first." Later that night, when the crowd was gone, the diner glowed softly in the dark, a symbol reborn. George stood by his truck, watching through the window as Clarissa and Louis counted tips, joking with the staff. He smiled. Then he reached into his pocket and unfolded a small paper napkin, the last one from the old stack. On it, he wrote, "Ownership isn't about money. It's about meaning." He folded it, left it on the diner counter, and slipped out quietly. Weeks later, the diner story became a documentary. Millions watched. Rick's deposition went public. The board reshaped its structure. Worker wages rose across industries. But beyond headlines and hearings, the legacy was simpler. A billionaire remembered he was human. A waitress discovered her strength. And a diner, once broken, became a beacon for what business could be when heart outrank greed. George walks along the beach at sunrise. No cameras, no suits, just a man and the quiet rush of the tide. He stops, digs his shoes into the sand, and watches the horizon. For the first time in decades, he doesn't feel like he's running anything. He's just here. He whispers, "Justice isn't punishment. It's a chance to start again." And as the sun rises higher, the sound of the waves fades into music, the same rhythm that once echoed through the diner sink, where all of this began. George Weston stands outside, leaning against his truck. A breeze ruffles his worn navy cap. The parking lot is empty, just morning birds, the faint smell of coffee, and the hum of a world slowly waking up. He looks through the window and sees Clarissa laughing with Louis as they prep for the breakfast rush. Steam curls from the kitchen like hope made visible. He speaks, not to them, but to us. "I used to think success was a finish line, that if you ran far enough, fast enough, and rich enough, you'd arrive somewhere called enough. But the truth is, success doesn't live in corner offices. It lives in moments like these, small, invisible, and painfully human. I've seen greed wear suits and kindness wear aprons. I've seen cruelty passed off as policy and compassion mistaken for weakness. But I've also seen the miracle of what happens when people decide to care again. The world won't fix itself. It never has. It waits for someone to pick up the first piece, for someone to choose decency over power, truth over comfort, courage over silence. If I've learned anything, it's this. The richest people aren't the ones who own the most. They're the ones who give back what they never should have taken, dignity. So the next time you see wrong, don't wait for a billionaire to show up in disguise. Don't wait for someone richer, louder, or braver. Be the one who stands. Be the one who speaks. He turns, walks toward the rising sun. Because kindness doesn't cost a fortune. It creates one. Undercover Billionaire left a $1 tip. What he wrote on the napkin changed her life. Based on a true kind of story.